Hi, this is Gia, Luxury Brand Equity Partner, and today I'm going to be speaking on independent luxury fashion brands and more specifically on how they can navigate a legacy-driven industry. And so I'm super excited to speak on this because I know that there are tons of independent designers that are on the rise, and they're always looking how to navigate this space, both creatively and commercially. So if you're an independent designer or you're an executive representing a luxury fashion brand, this is going to be extremely favorable for you, and it's going to help you understand how to really navigate a complex industry like this, especially with the competitive nature and the consumer demand being so fickle right now. So we all know that legacy giants have long ruled in luxury fashion. They've commanded a huge market share. They still have a lot of global influence, and we are going to see a shift in them trying to engage new generations. A lot of our favorite fashion brands like Louis Vuitton, Dior, Fendi, they're all financially backed and protected by conglomerates like LVMH, Kering, Richemont, Luxottica, to name a few. And so their job is to continue to sustain their history, their heritage, and the savoir faire. And so, with that being said, you're going to see in coming days that a lot of legacy brands are going to work overtime to protect their brand equity that they've built for centuries. They're going to focus on preserving their DNA and signature codes. And so a lot of that really ties into appealing to new audiences in innovative ways without diluting their brand image or their competitive advantage. Between last year and this year, I would say the fashion industry is definitely growing with uncertainty. So, in my last video, when I talked about brand management for independent luxury fashion and beauty brands, and how they can utilize that type of business model, I would encourage everybody to go back and watch it. I talked about the steep revenue declines and how companies are still working to bounce back from that. The continuous price increases were a huge impact to those revenue declines because they lost a great deal of aspirational shoppers. And so, beyond just macroeconomic issues like inflation, self-inflicted wounds like price increases while value decreased was one of the reasons for that. And so, aspirational shoppers took notice of that. They seen that they were paying more for less value, and so they began to gravitate towards accessible luxury. And what we're seeing now is independent designers are the ones offering that accessible luxury. They're offering a sense of community. They have a distinctive approach when it comes to storytelling. Um, a lot of consumers tend to want great quality without breaking the bank, but at the same time, they're willing to pay that price, but they want to ensure that the value matches that. Independent designers are doing exceptionally well in doing that. So, when consumers are shopping with indie designers, they are getting a clear sense of value for what they're paying for and what it is that they're experiencing. In the coming days, you will see that there will be a return of differentiation, not just with legacy fashion companies, but also with indie designers as well. Um, Pricing strategies are expected to improve. Collections are also expected to create, to have more standout products that will appeal to consumer demands and also grow in originality and meaningful distinction for sure. So I found this really interesting study on business of fashion, and most of the insights that you see here are taking place between 2023 and 2024. A lot of the emerging to established independent fashion brands have outperformed global legacy companies. And so in this study, they pretty much call it mega brands, but most of the mega brands are Louis Vuitton, Dior, Gucci. So this was really impressive to see. And most of this data also reinforces that a lot of brands are making this continuous shift towards being more accessible, and prioritizing entry level categories like jewelry, watches, and handbags. And it's pulling in a lot of their revenue, and it's a primary point of engagement for most customers. When it comes to the advantages of luxury fashion brands operating independently, I want to speak to this a lot because it's something that is quite often overlooked. There is a lot of misconceptions about operating independently, but one of the key advantages would be creative control and speed. If you are an independent designer, you do have the luxury of making a lot more quicker decisions without corporate approval or layers of corporate approval. In a legacy company, you're often going to have tons of executive decisions from left to right, and that can really slow down the capacity or growth of the brand in general. But of course, when you're operating as a designer and it's just you, and you might be working alongside a business partner, you're able to make a lot more quicker decisions on how you want to show up when it comes to brand DNA, when it comes to your product strategy, how you want to price your products, or new collections, how you want to communicate to your audience, and how you decide to partner with third-party retailers. You also can grow selectively. At the root of the fashion brand, as a fashion brand, you still are a luxury business. So it's all about protecting that exclusivity. So scaling intentionally is important, and within this phase, you're not necessarily, lured into the pressure by stakeholders or shareholders to move a certain way because you have to pay off a huge corporate debt, or, the company is at risk of losing its customers. As an independently owned luxury fashion brand, you have that creative freedom. You're able to make quicker decisions. You can grow selectively, and you can still remain authentic. You can appeal to the culture through very organic, humanistic campaigns, and you can build stronger communities and have a lot more controlled client services. One of the most interesting brands to date would be Kate. If if you're not aware of this brand, it's a contemporary luxury women's wear brand based in New York City. The founder and designer, Catherine Holston, has created something so unique out of clear market necessity. And since the inception of the brand has been very creative and commercially sound. And so it's very rare to find independent luxury fashion brands that are like that. The vision from the beginning has been to redefine American luxury. And so the brand has done an exceptional job at really balancing softness and power throughout its aesthetic. And a lot of their assortment is focused on elevated everyday essentials. So you will see that there is a centering in on modern women, moving away from this traditional notion of womanhood. And Kate has done an amazing job at moving away from this idealized fantasy of how men have kind of like, I would say that most men in the fashion industry have always been responsible for how women should show up in their clothing and how they should show up in their everyday life. And Kate is pretty much redefining that. So there is a bigger purpose to the brand beyond just the softness and the power that it displays through its aesthetic. It also does a really great job in maintaining its origins. So they're focusing on remaining in New York Fashion Week or having a New York Fashion Week presence without being able to show in Paris. So it's very focused on combining that strong creative vision with commercial discipline, maintaining its origins, and the founder really stays very legacy minded. Besides Kate being an amazing brand that we can point out that knows how to balance both creative and commercial success, there are still some common mistakes that most independent luxury fashion brands make. And so I know earlier I spoke about creative freedom and it being an advantage, but it also can be a disadvantage for most designers who really want to push the creative boundaries when it comes to design. So oftentimes, signature designs can come at the expense of business rigor. And when you want to push innovation forward, but you're not quite understanding how to really monitor the expenses or cash flow, that is where it becomes a huge stumbling block for most designers. In addition to that, you do have operational gaps across product, across the brand, across business. There seems to be a lot of limited brand stewardship in P&L and a lot of inconsistencies across brand campaigns. And so one bad production delay or inventory misstep can really hit a designer a lot harder when they're operating independently or smaller. Another huge mistake that I've seen designers make is when they're trying to compete with legacy companies. They wanting to become the next Gucci or Louis Vuitton. There's not necessarily anything wrong with that, but keeping up with the rat race of fashion really does demand both a lot of capital, not just in terms of money, but mental capital as well. Mental health can be impacted as well as a designer when you're trying to keep up season after season and with different types of consumer demands. It's important to just really recognize your own true potential, your own cultural uniqueness, and focus on building a strong community of your own. Outside of that, as I mentioned before, visibility and vanity metrics will always be fashion's sweet spot. External success and PR, designers often get caught up in that and they steer away from more serious areas like operations and focusing on building profitability for themselves. So with that, there's a lot of limited understanding around having a strong business model and really just being built on true luxury practices. In order to move forward in legacy fashion spaces today, it's more about becoming legacy minded and future focused. If you look at some of the greatest fashion brands, that are operating under these conglomerates like LVMH and Kering, every executive has to think and make business decisions with legacy in mind. And so, as an independent designer or an executive that, again, represents a luxury fashion brand, you have to think very similar. At the heart of a fashion brand, you are still a luxury business. And so you have to avoid getting caught up in short-term trends, vanity metrics, like visibility, although that's 100% important, especially within that early to emerging growth phase. It's not as important as thinking long term in the generations that you'll serve hereafter. So thinking innovatively is important, but what do you want your legacy to become is more important. It's a huge question that you want to ask now. Leaning into entry point and accessible products, as I said earlier, like jewelry, handbags, things like that, those are some really strong entry points for a lot of customers who are investing in luxury, especially for younger customers who are making their first time luxury purchases. And as secondhand or pre-loved fashion items become a lot more popular, you're going to have some sort of entry level product that will fund the brand long term or will steer the revenue of the brand long term. You also want to make sure that you're reinforcing brand DNA consistently. So ensure that as an independent luxury fashion brand, you do have signature design codes that help you to stand out within a crowded luxury market. And you are storytelling across every seasonal collection. You also want to make sure that you are building direct, strong relationships with customers. I cannot stress that enough. Ensuring that you're making sure that you're strengthening retention around those loyal customers as well. So repeat loyalty is a lot better than getting a one-off transaction, and don't focus on volume-driven growth, focus on prioritizing being intentional and, making sure that you're expanding sustainably. With all of that in mind, as an independent luxury fashion brand, it's super important for you to navigate this legacy endowed space with a brand management partner. And so, a brand management partner is going to think holistically. They're going to see the 360-degree picture and they're going to think beyond just the surface of visibility and marketing and communications. They're going to ensure that all of the areas of your business, be it product, brand itself, or the business strategy, are aligned. They're aligned seamlessly, right? So, as a designer, when you hire a brand management partner, you are getting someone to come alongside of you and review seasonal collections and ensure that everything that you do has a strong commercial lens, that you're able to balance that creative freedom with business discipline. You're identifying opportunities for sales growth. Your storytelling aligns across multiple digital platforms, and that you do have a clear scaling plan for the future. And so, normally within that early to emerging growth phase, or even if you're in established phase, you could have long-term goals of preparing for investment. And with investment, investors want to see brand equity built up over a sustained period of time, and they want to see that you've grown your brand in such an organic way. And so one of the key ways of doing that is having a brand management partner being able to help you spell all that out. Your next step as a luxury fashion brand is to identify those key talent gaps across product, brand, and financial touch points. Oftentimes, what tends to happen, operating independently as a fashion brand is that, you do operate on a small level. You don't have the luxury of hiring a full house in-house team yet. And so there are a lot of gaps that significantly impact the brand as a whole. And so that might be strategy direction, that might be day-to-day execution in brand operations. So it's important to look across these areas, and you may have one area that needs fulfillment. You may need all three areas fulfilled. So it's important to look at that closely before pursuing a brand management partnership. Aside from that, you do want to look at if you have a clear plan for revenue growth and profitability beyond just the day-to-day creative decisions that are being made across designing new seasonal collections. It goes beyond just that. You have to ensure that they're aligned commercially with, your objectives for growth and how you plan to scale. So, thank you so much for watching this video. If you have not subscribed to this channel yet, feel free to subscribe. I will place a link in a description below for you to submit an inquiry form, just so that we can start off with a conversation and we can learn exactly where you need the support and how we can, as a brand management partner, support your brand holistically. So